The summer heat hangs thick and heavy, a physical weight in the humid air, pressing down on the patchwork of picnic blankets and folding chairs spread across my Aunt Carol's sprawling back lawn. The scent of burnt hot dogs and sweet, cloying punch mixes with the faint perfume of wilting lilies from Carol's prized garden border. The drone of 100 conversations, the shrieks of distant children, it's the familiar symphony of the annual Miller family reunion. I sip my lukewarm soda, eyes scanning the crowd, trying to find a neutral corner, a quiet pocket away from the usual scrutinizing gaze. And then I see him, Uncle George, holding court near the grill, his laugh a booming cannon blast that silences smaller conversations around him. He spots me, his gaze locking on mine across the lawn. A slow smile spreads across his face, the kind that never reaches his eyes. My stomach tightens into a cold knot. This is it. The annual assessment. The performance review of my life, delivered publicly, with zero tact and maximum volume. If you know this feeling, this tension, this suffocating weight of expectation and judgment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My life, up to this point, hadn't exactly followed the Miller family blueprint. The blueprint was simple: stable job, preferably something with engineer or accountant in the title, white picket fence, 25 kids, maybe a golden retriever named Buddy. My path had veered sharply off course, paved with late nights, ramen noodles, and a seemingly irrational obsession with building something that didn't exist yet. Something that most of my relatives, particularly Uncle George, couldn't quite grasp. My parents were resigned. They tried the gentle nudges towards stability, the hopeful suggestions of grad school or a corporate ladder. But they saw the fire in my gut, the absolute conviction, and eventually, bless their hearts, they just hoped for the best. They hoped I wouldn't end up living in a box under a bridge, which, if you listen to Uncle George, was the highly probable outcome of my chosen trajectory. Uncle George embodied the family's idea of success. He'd climbed the corporate ladder, bought the big house, drove the German car. He was the one everyone else nodded along to, the arbiter of how things are, and for years, his favorite pastime had been pointing out the perceived deficiencies in my life choices. My lack of a real job title, my erratic income, the fact that my office was initially a corner of my cramped apartment kitchen. To him, it wasn't just a different path, it was a failure to launch, a refusal to grow up. He'd approach me at every gathering, a drink in one hand, a condescending smile on his face, and launch into it. "Still playing around with that computer stuff, are you?" He'd ask, making computer stuff sound like finger painting. "Heard you're still working out of your apartment. Must be nice, no overhead," he'd say, the no overhead loaded with implications of no income. He never asked about what I was actually building, the countless hours, the technical hurdles, the small breakthroughs. To him, it was all just a hobby, a phase I needed to snap out of. This particular summer reunion felt different, though. I felt a strange mix of bone-deep exhaustion and a fragile, carefully guarded hope. The project, the one that had consumed me for years, was finally showing signs of life. Real, tangible traction. But it was still precarious, still required every ounce of my energy, every penny I scraped together. I was still living lean, still working insane hours. From the outside, to someone like George, I probably looked exactly the same as I had 5 years ago. The failure. He navigates the lawn with the practiced ease of a man who owns the ground he walks on, making a beeline straight for me. My parents stiffen slightly beside me. They've been through this before. They know what's coming. He stops a few feet away, plants his feet, and smiles, that same shark-like smile. Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence," he booms, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Heads turn. My cheeks burn. Here it comes. "George," my dad says, attempting a placating tone. "It's good to see you." George waves a dismissive hand. Yes. Always good to see family. Especially those of us who've, made something of themselves. He pauses, taking a long, deliberate sip of his drink, letting the implication hang in the air like the humidity. He turns back to me, lowering his voice slightly, but still loud enough. So, still pursuing that creative endeavor of yours? It's going well, Uncle George, I say, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let the familiar prickle of defensiveness show. He laughs, a short, sharp bark. Going well? What does that even mean? Are you making a living? A real living? Or are you still surviving on what is it you do again? Making websites for local businesses that nobody visits. It was more than that. So much more. I was building a platform, a community tool, something I truly believed could make a difference. It wasn't just websites, it was complex, innovative, and required a level of technical skill he couldn't even comprehend. But explaining it felt pointless. He wasn't interested in understanding, he was interested in judging. It's growing, I say, forcing a small smile. It's taking time, but it's growing. He shakes his head slowly, a look of profound pity on his face that felt like a physical blow. Time? You've been at this for years now. Years. Most people your age are already settling down, buying houses, building careers. You're still chasing whatever it is you're chasing. A pipe dream. The knot in my stomach tightens, constricting my breath. The heat suddenly feels unbearable, not just from the sun, but from the simmering rage and humiliation bubbling inside me. Every eye in our vicinity feels like it's on me, assessing, agreeing with George's unspoken verdict. He leans in slightly, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper that nonetheless carried across the lawn in the sudden lull of conversation. He smelled of expensive cologne and something vaguely stale. And then he says it, the words that cut deeper than any before, not just because they were cruel, but because they encapsulated everything he, and maybe others in the family, seemed to believe. Let's be honest, he says, his voice laced with false sympathy. At some point, you have to face reality. You've had your fun, played your little games. But it's time to accept it. You'll always be the failure in this family. The words hit me like a physical blow. They echoed in the sudden silence that seemed to fall around us. Always. Not just right now, but forever.
À permanent la belle.
The drone of the cicadas suddenly sounded deafening. The bright summer sun felt cold. My parents looked away, unable to meet my eyes, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and helplessness. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the taste of burnt hot dogs suddenly, like ash in my mouth. My mind reeled. Was he right? Had I been delusional? Was all the sacrifice, all the relentless work, all the belief, just a waste? Had I fooled myself into thinking I was building something meaningful when I was just delaying the inevitable truth? The truth that I just wasn't cut out for it, that I lacked some fundamental ingredient that others like George possessed. The humiliation washed over me in waves. It wasn't just George saying it. It was the quiet agreement I felt emanating from some corners of the crowd, the confirmation of their own unspoken doubts. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground, to be anywhere but here, under his gaze, under the collective gaze of the family that had always valued conformity and tangible, easily explainable success. For days, the words gnawed at me. They were a constant hum behind my thoughts, a shadow lurking in the corners of my apartment. Always be the failure. Was that my destiny? Had George, with his smug certainty, simply articulated a truth I'd been too afraid to admit? The energy drained out of me. The late nights in front of the screen felt heavier, the code more inscrutable. The enthusiasm that had fueled me for so long sputtered and threatened to die. What was the point? If the outcome was already determined, if the label was already applied, why keep fighting? It felt like trying to climb a mountain with someone constantly whispering in your ear that you were destined to fall. I scrolled aimlessly through social media, seeing posts from people who seemed to have it all figured out. Promotions, engagements, new houses, thriving businesses. Each one felt like a tiny pinprick, confirming my status as the outlier, the one who hadn't kept pace, the one who was falling behind, the failure. I skipped calls from friends, canceled plans. The world outside my apartment felt overwhelming, filled with potential encounters where I might have to answer questions I didn't want to answer, where I might see pity or judgment in someone's eyes. I retreated into myself, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my supposed failure, the tangled wires, the scattered notes, the ever-present glow of the monitor that now felt less like a portal to possibility and more like a mirror reflecting my inadequacy. Sleep offered little escape. Dreams were haunted by George's face, his voice echoing the damning words. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the feeling of being a failure clinging to me like a shroud. The pressure was immense. The project wasn't just my work, it had become intertwined with my identity, my sense of self-worth. And if it failed, it felt like I would fail, irrevocably and publicly. The self-doubt was a poison, seeping into everything. Was my code buggy? Was my design flawed? Was my fundamental idea just stupid? Every small obstacle felt like insurmountable proof of my incompetence. A server issue became confirmation I wasn't technically capable. A slow user adoption rate became proof my idea wasn't needed. The narrative of failure, once spoken by George, was now playing on repeat in my own head, narrated by my own voice, amplified by my deepest insecurities. I hit a wall, a concrete, impenetrable wall of despair. The finances were tighter than ever. A key feature I was banking on was proving incredibly difficult to implement. The initial buzz around the project had plateaued. It felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill, and the boulder was just starting to roll back down, crushing me under its weight. I remember one particularly dark night. It was late. The city outside my window was quiet. I was staring at my screen, at lines of code that looked like gibberish, my eyes stinging with exhaustion and unshed tears. I felt utterly, completely alone. George's voice was louder than ever, a relentless drumbeat in my skull. Always be the failure. I stood up, walked away from the computer. My apartment felt cold and empty despite the summer night. I looked around at the mess, the dirty dishes in the sink, the piles of paper, the general disarray that had become the backdrop to my life. It felt like a physical manifestation of the chaos inside me. This was it, I thought. This was the end of the road. I couldn't do it anymore. The fight was too hard, the voice of doubt too loud, the certainty of failure too overwhelming. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge. Nothing but condiments and a carton of milk that was probably sour. The sheer banality of the moment, the anticlimactic reality of hitting rock bottom over sour milk and a messy apartment, was almost comical. Almost. And then something shifted. It wasn't a lightning bolt, not a sudden surge of divine inspiration. It was quieter, deeper. Looking at that pathetic fridge, feeling that profound sense of defeat, something stubborn and fierce ignited within me. Was George right? Maybe. Maybe I would fail. Maybe the project would crash and burn. Maybe I wouldn't end up with the house, the car, the easily explainable success he valued. But the idea that he got to decide my worth, that his narrow definition of success was the only one that mattered, that he had the power to label me, to dismiss years of relentless work and passionate belief with a single, cruel sentence that was unacceptable. A cold calm settled over me. He saw failure. But what he saw was just the struggle, the messiness of the climb. He didn't see the countless hours of learning, the resilience forged in the face of setbacks, the sheer grit it took to keep going when every fiber of my being screamed for me to stop. He didn't see the process, only the perceived lack of conventional outcome. And maybe, just maybe, his definition of success was too small, too predictable, too safe. What if success wasn't just about the finished product, the title, the money in the bank? What if it was about the courage to try, the willingness to build something from nothing, the refusal to let others define your limits? In that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my struggle, I made a decision. George didn't get to win. His words didn't get to be my truth. Even if the project ultimately failed, I would not be a failure. I would not let his judgment be the final word on my life. I walked back to the computer, a different kind of energy flowing through me now. It wasn't naive optimism. It was a grim, resolute determination. I wouldn't just prove him wrong, I would prove to myself that his assessment was irrelevant. The goal wasn't just external validation anymore, it was internal liberation. I would finish what I started, not for him, but for me. And if, in the process, I could create something truly valuable, something that helped people, something that mattered beyond the narrow confines of his understanding, that would be the real victory. The work didn't magically become easier. The code didn't debug itself. The funding didn't materialize overnight. The struggles were still immense, the setbacks still demoralizing. But the internal landscape had shifted. George's voice was still there sometimes, a persistent echo, but it no longer held the power to paralyze me. It became fuel. Every time doubt crept in, every time I felt overwhelmed, I thought of his face, his smug certainty, and a fresh wave of resolve would wash over me. He doesn't get to be right. I pushed harder than ever before. I reached out to potential users, listened to their feedback, iterated tirelessly. I cold-emailed experts, sought advice, swallowed my pride, and asked for help. I learned to silence the internal critic, to focus on the work itself, not the potential outcome or the judgment of others. There were small victories. A positive user review, a mention in a local blog, a thank you email from someone who found the platform genuinely useful. Each one was a tiny pinprick of light in the persistent gloom, confirmation that what I was building did have value, even if it wasn't yet the kind of value George understood. The project began to gain momentum. Slowly at first, then faster. Features I'd struggled with finally clicked into place. Users started recommending it to others. Local community leaders took notice. The messy, uncertain computer stuff was starting to look less like a hobby and more like something real. Something that was making a difference. And then came the call. An official-sounding voice on the other end of the line. The city. They were launching a new initiative to support local innovation and community projects. My platform had come to their attention. They wanted to talk. The meetings were surreal. Sitting across from city officials, explaining my vision, the years of struggle condensed into a polished presentation. They understood. They saw the potential. They saw the value. It felt like speaking a different language than the one I'd spoken to George. A language of impact, of community, of forward thinking. The conversation evolved. They weren't just offering support, they were proposing a partnership. Integrating my platform into city services, promoting it to residents, providing resources for further development. It was more than I could have ever dreamed of. It was validation on a scale I hadn't even dared to imagine. And then, the final piece of the puzzle, the one that brought a strange, full-circle feeling to the whole journey. They wanted to publicly acknowledge my work at an upcoming community event. An event I soon learned that many prominent local families would be attending, including, inevitably, the Millers, including Uncle George. The day of the family reunion arrived again, exactly 1 year after George had delivered his damning verdict. The air was humid, the smell of barbecue was thick, the drone of family chatter filled the air. It was the same setting, the same faces, but everything felt different. I felt different. The knot of anxiety in my stomach was still there, a faint echo of past encounters, but it was overlaid with a new sensation, quiet confidence. George was there, of course, holding court near the grill, just like last year. Our eyes met. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that acknowledged my presence without validating it. He probably assumed this year would be a repeat of the last. Another opportunity to casually inquire about my progress and deliver another thinly veiled judgment. He had no idea. Absolutely no idea. The reunion was proceeding as usual, the awkward small talk, the kids running wild, the abundance of potato salad. And then there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A hush fell over the crowd near the main patio. People started gathering, craning their necks. The mayor had arrived. Mayor Thompson wasn't a regular fixture at the Miller family reunion. His presence signaled something out of the ordinary. He stood near the makeshift stage that had been set up for the usual family announcements and sing-alongs, a microphone in his hand. My heart started to pound. This was it. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone. His voice, amplified, cut through the remaining murmurs of conversation. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his tone warm and official. "Thank you all for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here, amongst so many pillars of our community." He spoke for a few minutes about community spirit, about the importance of local engagement, the usual pleasantries. My eyes were fixed on him, then darting nervously to the crowd, trying to gauge reactions. I saw my parents exchanging nervous glances, unsure what was happening. And then I saw George. He was standing a little distance away, a look of mild curiosity on his face. He probably thought the mayor was here to shake hands and talk about property taxes. "Today," Mayor Thompson continued, his voice growing stronger, "I want to take a moment to recognize someone who has truly embodied that spirit. Someone who, with incredible vision, persistence, and technical skill, has built something remarkable right here in our city." He paused, looking out at the crowd. My palms were sweating. This felt both like a dream and terrifyingly real. Through tireless effort and a deep commitment to improving the lives of their fellow citizens, the mayor announced, his voice ringing out, they have developed a platform that is already making a significant impact. Connecting resources, fostering community, and demonstrating the power of local innovation. He smiled, a genuine, proud smile. He looked directly towards me, where I stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. "It is my honor," Mayor Thompson declared, his voice swelling with pride, "to present the inaugural City Impact Award to your very own. My name." The world seemed to stop. For a split second, there was absolute silence. Then, a ripple of surprise, then a wave of applause that built into a roaring ovation. People were cheering, clapping, some were whistling. My parents rushed forward, their faces beaming, tears welling in their eyes. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling shaky, a dazed smile on my face. I shook the mayor's hand, accepting the framed award he presented. The applause was deafening now, a wall of sound washing over me. And through the crowd, past the smiling faces, past my tearful parents, my eyes found Uncle George. He was standing exactly where he had been, near the grill. But the smile was gone. His jaw had gone slack. His eyes were wide, staring not at me, but at the mayor, at the award in my hands, at the cheering crowd. The confident, booming George was gone, replaced by a man utterly, completely blindsided. He hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't even considered it a possibility. He'd been so certain of my trajectory, so fixed on his own narrow definition of success, that the reality of public recognition, of validation from the highest local authority, simply hadn't computed. His face was a mask of disbelief, quickly followed by something that looked like indignation? Confusion? It was hard to tell through the shock. He looked around, as if searching for someone to explain this anomaly, this glitch in his understanding of the family hierarchy, this blatant contradiction of his pronouncement. The laughter, the cheers, the flashing cameras, someone was taking pictures. It all swirled around me, a triumphant cacophony. In that moment, standing there with the mayor, holding that award, I wasn't just proving George wrong. I was dismantling his entire worldview, at least as it applied to me. His words, "You'll always be the failure," evaporated in the face of this undeniable, public success. He had labeled me, but the city, the community, the mayor himself had just applied a different, much heavier, much more positive label: innovator. Impact Award winner. Not failure. I saw him take a step back, bumping into a patio chair. He muttered something under his breath, his face pale. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing, his usual bluster deflated. He didn't come over to congratulate me. He didn't offer a handshake. He just stood there, watching, as the family members he'd always held court over now surrounded me, offering their congratulations, their genuine, unforced pride. The rest of the reunion was a blur of handshakes, hugs, and choked-up congratulations. People who had once subtly avoided my gaze were now seeking me out, their voices filled with genuine admiration. My cousins, my aunts, even the distant relatives who barely knew my name, they all wanted to see the award, hear about the project. Uncle George remained on the periphery. I saw him talking to my dad later, His gestures clipped, his tone low and serious. He didn't approach me again. His annual assessment had been rendered spectacularly obsolete, not by my words or my arguments, but by an external, undeniable reality presented by the mayor of the city. He hadn't just been proven wrong, he had been publicly, irrevocably mistaken. The victim hadn't just survived, they had thrived and been recognized for it on a stage George could never reach with his corporate ladder climbing alone. The victory felt sweet, incredibly sweet. Not just because I had defied his expectations, but because I had done it by pursuing something I believed in, something that genuinely helped people. The award wasn't just a trophy, it was a symbol of resilience, a tangible representation of years of pushing through doubt and difficulty. But there was also a touch of melancholy. The family dynamic, forever scarred by years of judgment, wouldn't magically heal overnight. George's behavior wasn't likely to change fundamentally. The moment was a powerful turning of the tables, a profound vindication, but it also highlighted the persistent toxicity, the deep-seated need for some family members to tear others down. It was a victory, yes, but one on a battlefield that should never have existed within the family circle. Still, holding that award, feeling the warmth of my parents' embrace, seeing the genuine pride in the eyes of those who had quietly believed in me, or at least hadn't actively torn me down, that was the real reward. The weight of George's words, the failure label he had tried to brand me with, it was gone. Lifted by the applause, by the mayor's words, by the undeniable proof that I had built something meaningful. My worth wasn't determined by his approval, or anyone else's narrow definition of success. It was determined by the courage to pursue my vision, the resilience to overcome setbacks, and the commitment to create something of value in the world. The greatest validation wasn't the award itself, but the quiet knowledge that I had kept going, that I hadn't let the doubters, especially the ones closest to home, win. I wasn't the failure. I was the one who built. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear a version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.